Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Samfiru Tumarkin Employment Law Show, live employment law show. My name is Sandy Chen. I'm a lawyer based out of our Vancouver office. I deal with employment issues across the board, terminations, whether you're having harassment issues or any issues at work with harassment. A lot of my work these days has been related to COVID and vaccinations. So I'm here for the next 28, 29 minutes. This is live, so I know people are here from YouTube and Facebook. If you can put in your questions in the text box or type her in somewhere in front of you there. I can't see you obviously, but if you put in your questions, I should be able to see it on my text box to the right here. So I will be here for the next 28 minutes. Please ask me anything and everything. I'll do my best to answer. Obviously some situations do take, are more nuanced than others, but I'll do my best to kind of help out with whatever you're dealing with. Again, so I'm based in BC. My colleague, actually, two of my other colleagues are based from Ontario. So if you're from Ontario, I'm sorry if I can't help you. I'll do my best. And if you're from BC, you can ask me anything related to employment law. Again, if you're dealing with issues of severance, any issues with bullying and harassment at work, if you're like some of my clients these days dealing with kind of choosing between vaccination or being let go or put on leave, feel free to put those questions out there. So we've got our first question here from Marilla. Marilla asks, if you get another job that is less than what you made before, why can't you file your case until you're actually fired, even if put on unpaid leave? So sorry, I don't. If you tell me a bit more about your situation, do you have two jobs at the same time? If you are you talking about a situation where you're actually put in another position with the same employer? If that's the case, if another job is substantially different in a negative way, or if they've cut your pay, you don't actually have to wait until you're fired. You can claim what's something called what's called in legal terms a constructive dismissal of your employment. Oh, I see. You took a second job with a new employer. So I guess my question to you is, if you're still with the old job, and they've put you on an unpaid leave, that sounds to me, and it's them, the employer that's initiated that leave, that sounds to me like you might have a case for constructive dismissal, meaning just because they haven't said they fired you doesn't mean that you can't claim for severance. Before you take that step, I would talk to, myself or another lawyer about the, specifics of your situation. An unpaid leave, I'll tell you in general, Marilla, is a constructive dismissal of your employment. They can't just put you on an unpaid leave unilaterally without your consent. And so I'm not sure, I don't know where you got the, I guess, advice or from whoever that you can't file your case until you're actually fired. That's not true. If you're on an unpaid leave, I mean, in general, you probably could claim constructive dismissal, depending on the reason you're on the unpaid leave, of course. So hopefully that answered your question, Marilla. I mean, feel free to hit me with follow-up questions if you'd like. I'm just gonna get to these other ones for now. So Nightmare Girl asks, if you don't consent to antigen testing under Directive 6 while the CMHOOH can't compel it, I've been let go with a cause after 11 years. So Nightmare Girl, let me know what province you're from. I want to be careful because, in BC, in certain industries, the government has mandated vaccination for actually quite a few industries. So let me know which province you're from and what industry you work in your position. It's a more nuanced question than that, but my understanding is you were refusing the testing, not so much the vaccination. Belinda is asking, am I allowed to take a job while I'm put on leave by my employer? Would that be seen as quitting? Belinda, that's a really good question, and it's hard for me to give you a yes or no. If you've been put on a temporary layoff, as long as you're allowed to take a job, as long as that job isn't in conflict with your current job. So, if you're the director of marketing for a company, you can't go working as the director of marketing for a competing company. If you're on leave, and depending on the reason why you're on leave, um, it could go either way. I would say in general, it's not really a concern unless you're going to work for a competitor in a position that kind of conflicts with your current position. Before doing it, Belinda, I talked to, I'd get some advice just on your situation. And just, I think the two most important factors are why are you on leave and what kind of job are you thinking of taking? For most of my clients, it's not an issue, especially if it's a temporary layoff, right? Because you have to pay the bill somehow. And if you're really concerned about it, Belinda, you can ask your employer for permission, right? Get their express approval to take whatever job you're thinking of taking. Okay, so Carl asks, he's in Vancouver, he's working in a non-union environment, unpaid leave Jan 1st for not getting the vaccine. They asked for human rights exemption and still need to be tested every 3 days. What can I do? I heard the government changed the clause for cause losing your job. So Carl, I think the most important question I have for you is what industry are you in, and who's your employer and what's your position? Just to the last part of your question, Carl, there was a regulation in BC that came into effect. I want to say last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. What that regulation essentially says is if you're a BC government employee, a public service employee, and you're terminated under the COVID vaccine policy, right? That the human rights, or sorry, the human resources policy that was implemented, which I think says you have to be vaccinated by. I think the deadline actually came up already last week. There was a regulation, Carl, that came into effect that says if you're terminated under that human resources policy, which is basically a mandatory vaccination policy, it's deemed to be for cause. The important thing to note about that, Carl, is that's, as far as I'm understanding right now, is that's only for public service employees in BC. So, it probably, I mean, if you're a public service employee, you might be out of luck. If you're not, then let me know who your employer and industry are, and we can, maybe I can give you some more specific advice. Okay, so Nightmare Girls in Ontario. So Nightmare, I'm I can't answer that question for you, not because I don't want to, because I just don't know the nuances of Ontario right now. Each province is approaching the issue slightly differently. For example, BC, I know they've mandated the vaccine for most healthcare workers. I think they're actually planning on doing it for private clinics, or I think the government's announced they have plans to do it for private clinics next. Ontario is a whole different, the legislative scheme is very different there. I don't know what they've done with the directives that they have. So my colleague from Ontario, I believe two of them do these shows every other week. So I would check our Facebook page for when they come on, and maybe you can ask them about that, or obviously reach out to our firm anytime and talk to one of our lawyers from Ontario. Justin Halter is from Alberta. Employer said vax or test. I don't want to do either. Do I have to pick one? Yeah, Justin, I'm going to refrain from Alberta as well. Again, and for any other people out there, not from BC, that want to ask me about vaccination questions, I'm going to try to refrain unless I, 100% know the answer. I'm just not as familiar with what other provinces are doing with their vaccination schemes right now, for employees. So, and I do apologize for that. I just don't want to give anybody, obviously, the incorrect answer. So, Carl, you're in hotel maintenance. I think you're fine, Carl. As far as I know, your industry's not, the government has not said that you have to get vaccinated in that industry. And the regulation I was talking about before, Carl, wouldn't apply to you unless you're a public service employee for the government, the provincial government in BC. So in your case, I mean, I guess to answer your question, if you do get put on an unpaid leave, my view is that that's really a termination of your employment at law. And you probably, I mean, depending on the terms of your contract, you should be entitled to severance. The reason why I'm saying should is because obviously none of these cases have been litigated before. I'm very interested in seeing what happens with the first case that goes in front of a judge. And I think the question that's going to be put to the judge in general is, if you're in an industry where the government has not mandated vaccination and you've been terminated because of your failure to vaccinate, is that just cause for termination? My view is that it's not. Obviously, I could be wrong because it's ultimately it's the opinion of the judge that matters. My view is that in certain industries where, especially if you're in an office environment, as I am, and you're kind of separated from everybody else, and you have your own office to be in, I just don't see why it would be, necessary for a mandatory vaccination policy. And so, Carl, I think the same logic might apply to your workplace, hotel maintenance. If you're working kind of, if you've got enough space between your workplace, between people, it seems to me that they don't necessarily need a vaccination policy to ensure the safety of the workplace. In terms of the human rights exemption, I mean, they're very narrow. As I'm sure most people here know, the two major exemptions are religious and medical. Obviously, if you can get a note from your doctor, that's going to be helpful to get you an exemption from the vaccination policy. So Nightmare Girl, I'm reading your questions, and I guess I can try to answer you in general. So your question, how can they make you submit to a vaccine, change the terms of employment, and not give you severance? As I hope everybody on here knows, your employer can't physically hold you down and get you and inject you with the vaccine, right? It's the choice for people is get the vaccine or lose your job. In terms of changing the terms of your employment, I agree with you. I think it's unfair that they're doing that after you've been hired and maybe you're 20 years in, 25 years into your job, and they're just saying, hey, you have to get this injection, or else we're gonna let you go. The bottom line is, if you're not in a union, they can let you go, and the issue is severance. And to your point about severance, Nightmare Girl, it's going to come down to whether there's just cause or not for your dismissal. And one of the key factors, it might not be the only factor, but one of the key factors is it within, like, if the government is telling your employer, your employees have to be vaccinated, the employer doesn't really have a choice in that situation, right? So they're going to have to let you go, right? Or put you on an unpaid leave because the government has told them for your employees to work, they have to be vaccinated. So I guess that's a scenario, Nightmare Girl, where it seems unfair, but I guess, the employer can say to you, well, get the vaccine or we're going to let you go without severance. Lucky KC, I'm just reading your question. You work for the city of Toronto. You're unionized because you're in the grievance process. Since I'm not putting anyone in danger, can I sue if I don't win my grievance? So the complaint you'd be filing, Lucky, would be with the Human Rights Tribunal. There's nuances with whether, if you're unionized, whether you can still go in front of the tribunal or whether you still have to go through a grievance. If you're already in the grievance process because of the discrimination, I would say no, because you can't file the same claim with a different, entity or a different process if it's just the exact same claim. But I would talk to your union rep about it to get an answer with more certainty. Question from Janelle on Facebook. My company is requiring vaccination, but there are no options for testing as an alternative. How can I best respond to this policy? Should I write a letter or have a lawyer to do so? Yeah, Janelle, that's a good question, and it's a question I have to deal with a lot these past 3 months. I don't, whatever if the company is going to implement a mandatory vaccination policy, and your decision not to get it has nothing to do with medical or religious reasons, right? It's just kind of your personal choice. It's your personal. You just don't want to get it for whatever reason, other than medical or religious. I'm not sure that there's anything you can do to respond to that policy that will change the employer's mind. What I mean by that is, let's say hypothetically, you hire me to write a letter, right, to the company. And obviously lawyers don't work for free. I'm not sure that will change their mind, right? I'm not sure I could say something in the letter that'll change your employer's mind as to what they're going to do, right? If they're going to implement this policy, they're going to do what they're going to do. The only thing you can do is say, hey, I disagree with this policy. I'm telling them you're not going to get it. At the end of the day, by date X, whatever the policy says, if you don't have the vax, they're probably going to put you on a leave or let you go. The only scenario I think it'd be worth to hire a lawyer to write a letter, or for you personally to write a letter, is if you have some human rights exemption, some sort of exemption under human rights legislation. So, as I'm sure everybody here has heard, 1,000 times, religious and medical, right? In that situation, I think it's worth it to tell your employer why you cannot get the vaccine. And so I hope that answers your question. And again, Janelle, just keep in mind, if they do let you go or put you on a leave, I think depending on your employer and the industry you're in, they should be paying you severance. And so, if you're not unionized, they can let you go, but they've got to provide you with that severance pay. Okay, so question from Andreas on Facebook. Clear up, it's an issue with vacation entitlement. You have 160 hours of vacation time yearly after 5 years. You've been with the company 10 years. You have 85 hours unused remaining from 2020, and you have used up all 160 from this year. And your employer is denying any additional vacation time. Am I still entitled to those 85 hours as per employment standards? Yeah, Andreas, that's and I assume you're in Ontario because you're quoting the Ontario legislation, Employment Standards Act 2000. I'll say in general, I mean, you earn vacation time in days from the year before, right? So if you earn 160 hours, you should be able to take, that's 4 weeks in the year after. And if your employer is saying no, I don't understand what their explanation is. I know that for a lot of companies, it's use it or lose it, right? They'll pay you out for the vacation pay, but you lose that vacation time from the previous from the previous year if you don't use it. I'm going to refrain from trying to give you too much in case, just because I know you're from Ontario, it sounds like from the act you cited. But again, my colleagues will be here every other week. Two colleagues from Ontario that do these shows. Got a question from Gabriel. Is it legal to fire an employee for refusing to get a PCR test? Having in mind the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act, that is, can an employee get severance? Yeah, Gabriel, I think I don't think the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act really has any impact in the employer-employee relationship. I get the argument there. I get what the viewpoint is there. I just don't see it being too relevant. For your question of whether it's legal to fire an employee for refusing a test, I think it's certainly more reasonable in the circumstances to ask an employee to get a test rather than get the vaccine. And I can't give you a yes or no answer without knowing more specifics of your situation. If you have been let go, Gabriel, reach out. I would reach out and get some legal advice. But I will say that getting a test, I think, will be seen by a court as more reasonable than getting the vaccine. Ward asks, can your employer demand your vaccine status? And if you don't provide it, can they require you to pay for your own testing on your own time and further require you to submit medical data? So, and I'm going to start off this answer with an apology to everybody because for the vaccine stuff, it depends so much on what you do, what industry you're in, and why the company is saying they need this data, and why they're saying they need to implement a mandatory vaccination policy, right? If there's been if there's a workplace and there's been 100 cases in the workplace, obviously that company is going to be more entitled to implement a policy or ask for vaccination status. And the example I always give is if you're in an office and everybody's in their own, office and nobody's really close to each other, and there's been no cases in the workplace, why do you need a vaccination policy, right? So it's a question of degree. So I guess, Mr. Ward, to answer your question, yes, sometimes they can demand your vaccine status. That's reasonable under the privacy legislation. In terms of whether they can require you to pay for your own testing, again, my view is in BC they cannot, because there's a specific provision under the Employment Standards Act. I think it says something along the lines of you can't pass off business expenses to employees. I'm not sure that this has actually been before the Employment Standards Board in BC. And maybe it will, but in my view, that provision means the cost of testing the company has to pay for. Again, it could come down that my view is wrong. Obviously, it's the Employment Standards Board and the court that ultimately decides. But that's one argument you can make and say, hey, you can't pass off business expenses to me. Other provinces are different, I know, but in BC, I know that there's that one specific clause under the Employment Standards Act. So submitting medical data, again, it's going to come down to the question of what's reasonable. Vaccination status, I will tell you, in some situations, it is reasonable for employers to ask for it. The BC government has told, most people in healthcare and I guess the public service employees now, long-term care homes, assisted living facilities, they've asked those employers to say, you have to give us the data. So in those situations, if the BC government's saying, by way of executive order, we need it, then yes, your employer can demand it. So Ward, your follow-up question. So besides in the option to test your own expense, negating your severance, if the tests are like, I don't know, like some of the tests I hear are pretty expensive. I haven't personally had to deal with them, but some of my clients are telling me they're like $200 a pop or something. So they're fairly expensive. If the cost of the tests are like, more than 10 or 20% of your salary, of your compensation, that could probably give you the right to claim for severance under constructive dismissal. I'm not going to encourage anyone to do that before you seek legal advice. And that's just a general message for everybody. I'm just saying things in the general here. I think before you make any major life decisions, talk to a lawyer about your individual situation just to confirm before you. I would not make any decisions based on things that I'm saying here. I'm just trying to provide some general guidance. So Mr. Ward, to your question, I mean, if they're so expensive that it's lowering your overall compensation by a substantial percentage, that could be another way you claim for severance. The first way I talked about was obviously under the Employment Standards Act. You could say this is, a cost of doing business, so they can't pass it on to you. Sunny asks, I've been with my employer for over 10 years. My employer wants now to make significant changes to my employment contract. I have increased my salary and offered a signing bonus. Part of the changes include waiving my call entitlements. What are my options? Is this enforceable? Can I decline? Yeah, Sunny. So that's a really good question. I deal with your kind of situation a lot. I'll answer in general right now, but come talk to me or one of my colleagues afterwards. You don't. That's the kind of decision you don't want to make without getting some legal advice. I'll tell you, especially if you've been with the company for 10 years, right? If you're in BC, I'm sure you've looked into this, but you're signing away potentially 10 or 12 or more months of severance pay in exchange for 8 weeks pay. That's probably the severance they have to pay you when they let you go. If you accept, it will be enforceable because they're offering you something, a benefit to accept it. So increase your salary and a signing bonus. You can decline. It's certainly within your legal rights to decline. If you decline, I'm not sure what they'll do because if you decline, they have two options, right? They can say, we'll continue your employment as it is right now, no changes. Or they can choose to obviously let you go, which if you're not in a union, they can do it anytime. So I think, Sunny, talk to a lawyer before you make that decision. It is obvious, it will have a major impact on what happens upon termination. There could be other terms in there that aren't so favorable for you. And this is just general advice for anybody. If your company presents you with a piece of paper to sign, I'd read it over carefully first. If there's anything in there that, looks kind of, doesn't pass the smell test, or if you just want to get, if you think it takes away some of your rights, I'd run it by a lawyer before you sign it. Because whenever the employer asks you to sign something, I would say, most of the time it's not going to be good for you, unfortunately. So guys, I think I have time for one more question. I'm just trying to scroll through the comments here. Okay, so Jovelyn, this is my last question for today. She asks, what can I do if my employer terminates me for not taking the job because it's against my faith and religion belief? Been with the company 13 years. And Jovelyn, I mean, that's obviously one of the major issues that will have to be decided by a human rights tribunal, is what is that legal standard for religious belief? And what, is it enough to get you an exemption from from vaccination policies? There's been cases in the past with, I think, construction workers, and I think there's Sikhs, and the question was whether they had to wear a hard hat, but as part of their religious belief, these group of people had to wear turbans, and I think those decisions ruled in favor of of safety, meaning that just because it's a religious belief they have to wear a turban doesn't mean that they are permitted, they're granted an exemption for not wearing hard hats on the site, something along those lines. So Jovelyn, I think that case will take similar competing values into account, right? Your genuine belief in not getting the vaccine versus the safety considerations at work. And so again, I can't give you a yes or no answer. I can just tell you have an arguable case. It gets stronger if you can get some sort of confirmation from a religious leader saying that this is our belief. This is, something that we abide by, not getting vaccinated. So hopefully that gave you some general guidance. So sorry, guys. I know there's a lot more questions I didn't get to. My colleague will be on, I believe, tomorrow afternoon. Another BC colleague. So please tune in, and I'll be back in 2 weeks, same time, in Thursday in 2 weeks. And obviously, reach out to our firm in the meantime if you do want some specific legal advice to your situation. So thanks, guys, for coming, and I hope everybody has a great week.